I do not often rise in support of a bill from my colleague from Watsonville, and tonight will be no exception. You know, if this was a bill to turn California, into a shall issue state when it comes to CCWs instead of driver's licenses for illegals, I would be the first one to speak in favor, and I would be a resounding yes. But you know what this bill does? This bill is going to make it harder for business owners, and it's going to make it harder for those who rent properties, because now they're going to be put into a conundrum. We're telling business owners and we're telling property owners that might want to rent their property that you're going to be presented an ID that has a special mark on it to designate that this person is not a citizen, that they do not have a green card, so they are not authorized to work in this country. And so that employer is going to face a choice. And it's a choice they shouldn't have to make. Because in order to be compliant with state law, if AB 60 were to be passed off this floor and signed by the governor, they would be in violation of federal law. And if they decide that they want to be in compliance with federal law and not hire someone who is clearly not authorized to work in this country at this time, then they open themselves up to unlimited civil penalties, and lawyers will have a field day. And once again, we will have made California a particularly unfriendly place to do business because we create all these conflicting rules. What I would say, and we've talked about this many times here, there have been so many different issues on which we are going out ahead of a natural process that's already underway. We're going to figure out the entire immigration debate sometime in the next few years. It will be figured out. It will be sorted out. And maybe this bill will be completely unnecessary at some future point. But what we're doing is a huge mistake. And you know, we start here with an identification that is going to have a special mark on it. Some people have referred to that as a scarlet letter. You know what? I'm going to have to be in agreement with that. I think it's offensive that we are going to give people a separate but not quite equal identification. If people are going to come here and they want to come here to work, I think we ought to make that possible. If people want to come here to become citizens, we have a process, and I think we all agree on this floor we ought to make that easier. There's broad agreement for that. You've seen sides come together and vote for things that might surprise you. But this is a mistake. This is a mistake. Because we really don't know who we're putting these driver's licenses. We don't know the people that we're putting them in their hands because there's no longer any penalty for perjury in this bill. It has been struck out. And so you are now going to self-identify and self-verify. And I only hope, and I can't even imagine placing my hope in a federal government agency that is not my favorite, the TSA. But I can only hope that if somebody tries to board an airplane with one of these identifications, and they are not just somebody who came here to work, they are not just somebody who came here to have a better life, but they are like the people...
30 seconds, Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you. But they are like the people who boarded those airplanes just that we celebrated the anniversary of just several days ago, then I would hope that they would be stopped. But I'm deeply concerned. This is a fatally flawed bill, and I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Medina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I do rise in support of my colleague from Watsonville, and I'm honored to do so. When we get on the road, we expect those individuals driving beside us to have an understanding of the rules of the road and how to handle a vehicle. AB 60 is an important measure that is aimed at improving traffic safety. Allowing specified individuals to obtain driver's license would ensure that they are properly trained, tested, and insured. We have a responsibility to make sure that people who are on the road have been properly trained to handle a vehicle. With this purpose in mind, I respectfully ask for your support on AB 60.
Thank you, Mr. Medina. Ms. Gonzalez.
It's quite honestly with a heavy heart that I rise in support of this bill. And I'll be honest, for the last few hours, I've taken more phone calls and emails from community members and leaders who just can't seem to accept that folks in this country who don't have normalized status will have a different license. But it reminds me that the perfect is always the enemy of the good. And quite frankly, we can sit and debate for another 10 years, as Senator Gil Cedillo would have said from day one when he introduced this, that we could wait until we think what we want for every person in California who drives to have the same license as anyone else to support this. But the reality is this: we've set up a series of programs in this country. Most importantly, deferred action for students who we have accepted are contributing members of our society, who are here, who can go to school and can work and are still struggling to figure out how they're supposed to get there because they can't get a license. I wish more than anything this license would look exactly like mine. But this author and our Latino caucus has worked far too long and too hard to enable every person who's here to be able to at least drive without worrying about the fact that they can't get insurance, about worrying about the fact that their car may be impounded, and about being able to get from point A to point B. I understand that there will be people in my community who are very upset that I was not willing to say no to something that is not perfect. But I know there are far more who just want the opportunity to get to work every day, to take their kids to school, to contribute as human beings in the society, and I desperately ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Mr. Cooley.
Colleagues, I want to rise in support of this bill. I want to point out, you read the analysis carefully. It is true today as it was true when it first passed off the floor. This bill is supported by the property and casualty insurers that are in the business of auto insurance, State Farm Insurance, Farmers Insurance, the Personal Federation of California. It is a fundamental problem in our system today to have insured customers who, if they're in a collision, are at a high risk of encountering folks who do not have a license who are not insured. This is seen as a very direct way to support having people who are on the roads with a license, with insurance, in the system of indemnity insurance, which all of our constituents, by law, if you drive a car, you're to comply with. Everyone needs to step up and show responsibility. So the very conservative property and casualty auto insurance industry nationally is looking at this as a bill that is better for their customers who are insured, put them less at risk no matter who they encounter on the roadway. So this is a bill that serves every Californian and can reduce the aggravation of finding yourself encountering someone who is not insured.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley. Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this has been an ongoing debate since I've been here for the last 5 years, and it's usually not the concept that a lot of us has a problem with. In this particular case, we went further than issuing licenses to undocumented drivers here in California. We added additional rights, and let me start off with the good. Last time this was up last year, I argued that you cannot issue a document that you can't absolutely determine identification of because it violates the federal act. We can no longer use our driver's license to go on airplanes and stuff. We fixed that. You fix that with saying on there, this is not acceptable for federal purposes. It's only a license to issue drive vehicles. So I commend the author for that. But they went further. and that pendulum swung too far. There's also a section there that says this specifics that this violation of any state law, including the Unruh Civil Rights Act, Section 51 Civil Code, discriminate against illegal immigrant license for housing, employment. Again, like my colleague from the desert said, as an employer, if they produce this driver's license, what am I supposed to do? Follow the federal law or follow state law? Either one, I'm going to get myself in trouble as an employer. How about for housing? There's another thing that most members probably don't know is in here. When we apply for a driver's license, that is public record. The law enforcement could get to it. They can see where we are when we pulled over. We go check for warrants and see those type of things. This specifically says, prohibits a license issued to this section for being used to consider individual citizenship or immigration status as a basis for criminal investigation, arrest, or detention, i.e. the record is private. So even if you're looking at stalking, domestic violence, other activities, you can't use the information gained by the driver's license to go pursue a criminal offense. My application is public. These are not. There's always seemed to be some kind of poison pill in these documents that you can't just go after to test someone to see if they're capable of driving a vehicle safely. There always has to be these other agendas involved in there. Because of that, I'm going to ask for your no vote.
Thank you, Mr. Hagman. Ms. Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My concern with this bill is a little different than some of the previous speakers in that what I'm reading here says that this license cannot be used to discriminate or keep someone from employment. So that makes me think about security issues, and particularly our airports and our ports, where our airlines, though the airports are a federal issue, the airlines privately contract out for many of the jobs. So are we going to have people who choose to do us harm now being employed by our airports where they can do a whole lot of damage and kill thousands and thousands of people on the heels of 9/11? I would ask you to just consider that before you decide on your vote, and based on that, I would recommend a no vote. Thank you.
Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we often hear measures on this floor described as common sense. That's a stock phrase by which we try to communicate to each other that whatever we're proposing is simply the logical extension of a line of reasoning which is undeniable. And if common sense applies to anything, it would seem that it would apply to making sure that those who travel on our roads and streets and highways are licensed. Because not just common sense, but our experience tells us that people are going to need to get from one place to another. And that in our society, in order to do that, as often as not, they will do it by driving a motor vehicle. So the question then is, sensibly, do we want people on our streets and roads who have not been trained to drive, who have not been licensed to drive, who are not insured? Or does common sense tell us that it makes much more sense to ensure not just the safety of those who are licensed, but the safety of all of the rest of us, that those who are on our roads are indeed prepared to operate a motor vehicle safely and licensed to do so, as well as insured? Those who oppose driver's licenses for the undocumented, as I listen to the argument, often believe it to be some sort of reward. some sort of recognition that is unjustified, some sort of entitlement unearned. But that sense has to be diminished, it seems to me, when one thinks of the value of increasing public safety by virtue of providing licenses to all who can safely operate on our roads and have proven their eligibility to do so. Now, the previous speakers have talked of the ancillary deficiencies they see in this measure: security at airports, conflict with federal law, those kinds of issues, rather than about the license itself and what it means on our streets and roads for public safety. Those conflicts will be resolved. But the fundamental issue remains: how safe will our streets and roads and highways be? And there can be no doubt that common sense tells us that licensing drivers who are on those streets and roads and highways only makes sense. I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. Mr. Pettis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I too rise in proud support for AB 60 and want to thank Mr. Alejo too for his continuous work on this issue, as well as the continuous work of former Senator and Assembly Member Gil Cedillo for what he has done, and ensure that ultimately that folks that perhaps have been suffering in silence, have never had this opportunity to one day finally have a license. This is not a federal issue, folks. This license cannot be used for federal purposes. This is so that the common person that you might see on a daily basis in your own community can mow your own lawn. I think about a year ago, I think I talked about how this House sometimes talks about racism. I want to just talk a little bit about hypocrisy. We're talking about individuals that mow your lawns, that take care of your parents, our kids. We're talking about individuals that need to have a license so that they can get to work, and which ultimately allows the economy to continue. It helps all of us. This is a modest measure. It's not the best, perhaps. We could do more. We can do better. But we've been struggling and fighting for this for so many years. And I think it's time. We have too many families that are very concerned. See, like in the 56th Assembly District, many of my families are undocumented. I guess that's the reason why I tend to stand on these issues and speak on these issues. In Imperial County and Riverside County, because it is a border region, it's difficult. People just want to work. They want to achieve the American dream. But they're very fearful of getting pulled over. And then upon getting pulled over, they're fearful of being deported. They're not trying to rip you off, or they're not causing crimes. As a matter of fact, what they're trying to do is just make enough money to bring that home, to be able to buy some food and fruits and vegetables to feed their families, and then have a little bit extra for their kids. Luis Alejo and Gil Cedillo have been fighting for this for a long time. And with them struggling on this issue, there's been many public safety folk that have been very supportive of this measure as well. And so, although Sharon Grove will say blah, 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 right? I want to make sure I call this out. Blah, blah, blah. That's right. For you, that may be that. It may be that for you, Ms. Grove, blah, blah, blah.
Mr. Perez, please confine yourself to the subject matter at hand, and please do not refer to members by name. We are to confine our reference to members by characteristics other than name.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, and you have 30 seconds.
As members of the legislature, our job is to protect health, safety, and the welfare of all Californians. It is time that we act to address this issue. Hopefully, one day we will have comprehensive immigration reform that will take care of this issue. But until then, the state of California needs to step ahead. We need to lead. We need to direct. We need to set an example. And that's what this bill does. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. As a housekeep, members in the back of the chamber, I ask members of both houses in the back of the chamber to take any private conversations or debates off the immediate floor so that we can proceed with the debate at hand. We have several members that are still looking for recognition to speak on this matter. We will go through every member who is interested in debating this matter. Then we will take it up for a vote. When we do that, we will have no other business available for us to take up until the senators help us move the 8 assembly bills that are still on their floor, as we have moved every Senate bill that has come through our floor. With that, we will proceed to Ms. Harkey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I was not going to speak on this, but I do want to bring to the attention, thank you, with all due respect, I do want to bring to the attention of this House that one of the problems with this bill initially was with federal law, and we understand that. So we got told that we were hiring people to mow our lawns and take care of our parents, and this would make it, they would be able to do this with this bill because they would be able to drive. However, the notice on this card will say this card is not acceptable for federal purposes. This license is issued only as a license to drive a motor vehicle. It does not establish eligibility for employment, voter registration, or public benefits. In essence, it puts a big flag on the card that this is not for a person that is in this country legally or whatever. So I kind of question the purpose of the bill. And so I will leave that to the Assembly members, but I'm not really supportive of this because I don't think it accomplishes what any of us want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harkey. Mr. Amiano.
Thank you very much. And, you know, in the Tom Amiano perfect world, there were a lot of concerns about this bill. And, you know, frankly, I still have them. I admire Gil Cedillo so much and understand the sacrifice that he has put in the years he's put into this bill. He's even been ridiculed from time to time. It's beyond me why granting driver's licenses has become such a flashpoint. It's probably emblematic of a lot of institutionalized prejudice, etc. And it's also not up to me in any kind of colonial expression or way to say, well, don't go this way, go that way. I respect what my colleagues are putting forth here tonight. I am troubled by it. I wish it was better. I'm worried about it. I think that if this passes and the governor signs it, that we really need to monitor what's happening around it, so there is no racial profiling, there is no abuses, like when we landed on the moon, this is a small plie for man and a grand jante for mankind. I support this, and sometimes a girl has to do what a girl has to do.
Thank you, Mr. Amiano. Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This has been a bill that undoubtedly has been in the talks of this legislature for more than a decade now. We clearly think about Mr. Cedillo, but we think about now Mr. Alejo and working in efforts, combined efforts with the work that was left behind by Senator Cedillo, Assemblymember Cedillo. And we think to ourselves, why? Why has this been such an ongoing debate? Why has this been a matter that has not been resolved yet? And undoubtedly, unfortunately, we live in a society that's imperfect. We live in a society where discrimination and unfortunately racism is alive and well. And let's not be shy about it. Let's not pretend that the world is perfect, because it's not. But these imperfections have fractured our society, and they have left us in a place where we have to continue dialoguing on this debate. I had an opportunity over the last 3 years. I've had the opportunity over the last several years to dialogue about this matter, about this policy matter, with one of California's top cops, someone who's actually been recognized by some of the leading law enforcement agencies as a top cop in California, someone who has encountered California's most wanted and has taken down California's most wanted, people who have been known as California's cop killers and that sort of thing. And this individual told me that early on in his career, he had the opportunity with a fellow officer to pull over a gentleman for a taillight infraction. And this senior officer told this California top cop, recognized again by his peers throughout the state, cite him, have the car taken away and impounded for 30 days. And there was an internal struggle, because this individual, again, it was a taillight infraction. This individual was taking lunch to his wife at the manufacturing plant where she worked for many, many years. And this incident reminded this California top cop of his own father and his own mother. And he had a hard time impounding that car and telling that individual that his life was about to change. So he told his training officer, "I can't do it. Why don't you do it?" So this brings us to the reality that we live with in California. And as I've talked to this California top cop, I've realized that there's a more sensible way of treating the people in our community that are working so hard to take care of their families, to take care of their children, to provide a better opportunity for them to succeed in this state. That California top cop is continuing to provide for his family, as was exampled for him by his father. My brother found it too hard to tell this individual, "We're going to impound your car and we're going to destroy your life for you and your children." Members, these people who find themselves stressing out every single day, in fear every single day for their children, for their wives, for their households, to make ends meet, are people that are God-fearing, that just want to make it happen for their families so that their children might one day be a college professor, a police officer, an educator, someone that will give to their community, and by God, maybe even a California legislator. So I ask you, let's not be afraid of providing the American dream, the California dream, to people that are working so hard to do that for their children. I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Ms. Lowenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in strong support of this measure as the chair of the Transportation Committee because this is clearly about public safety. What we're talking about tonight is more than a license to drive. It's a license for an individual to work, a license for an individual to support their family, to build a better life. And for those of us who represent portions of Los Angeles, and many of us here do, we will remember that the top cop in Los Angeles, Chief Charlie Beck, believes in this driver's license and believes that what we've been doing over the past 16 years has not worked. So as long as we keep this from happening, we're going to see hit-and-run accidents where people run away because they don't want to be caught because they don't have a license. So as many of you have said, this is a measure about public safety and it's a measure about dignity. I urge your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Lowenthal. Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am heartened by this debate because the criticism that I hear most often on this floor is that because this license will be a little bit different, it might lead to profiling. It might lead to other challenges. And I share that concern. But if that's a cover for wanting to vote against the bill for other reasons, like continuing to pretend that these millions of workers don't exist, they do. They drive our roads. They drive to do the jobs that many of us won't do and don't want to do. They're in our communities. They are families in our communities. And to give them the dignity and the opportunity of having a license, even though, yes, a little bit different. And I will tell you I struggle with that because that difference could lead to things that we're going to have to clean up in the future if it does lead to profiling, if it does lead to some of the challenges that get recognized. But wouldn't we have a better California if we have communities that are recognized and that are functioning in our communities as we would expect them, as appropriate drivers, insured, and able to go to the jobs that we count on them? I strongly, strongly urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Dr. Weber.
Mr. Speaker and members, I rise also in support of this measure because of the things that have been raised about safety, about what we need to do to help individuals to live comfortably in this state. But I rise also greatly concerned because most of the comments on this floor seem to imply that all undocumented individuals are Latinos. That bothers me significantly because we know the fact is otherwise. And I'm often reminded of that movie, The Time to Kill. In the end, when the gentleman gave the story and he told them to close their eyes, and then he said, and in the end, he said, and just imagine this girl who was killed, and he says, and that she's white. Just to close your eyes for a minute and imagine that the undocumented is not Latino, is not your gardener, is not the person cleaning your house, is not the person working for minimum wage, because they live here too, and they're undocumented. But it's our own profiling that has caused us to develop some perspectives about who those individuals are. So I challenge us to think differently and realize that this is a safety issue about people who live here. And it's an issue of them having a license because they've demonstrated that they know the rules and they have the skills to navigate the highways, to protect all of us, that they can secure the insurance so that when they hit our cars or we hit theirs, that there's some fairness and justice in that process. But I want to challenge us to continually keep our minds on the fact that oftentimes we talk about things on this floor that we believe have a certain group attached to it. And that is not true based on the facts in the state of California. I ask for an aye vote for AB 60.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. Mr. Alejo, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I want to thank everybody who expressed and articulated their concerns and their support or comments about this historic bill. But I do want to remind everyone that before January 1st, 1994, there was no requirement to show proof of a Social Security number. In 1993, Senator Al Alquist authored a law that, for the first time ever, required people to submit a social security number for a driver's license. And it's only been since that implementation date that many undocumented persons have not been able to be eligible for a driver's license. So it used to be California law that they could apply and get tested and be insured and drive on our roads lawfully. But this is a very historic night for all immigrant communities. And as my colleague from San Diego said, it's not just Latino communities. It's African immigrants, it's Asian immigrants, it's European immigrants, it's immigrant communities of all colors and all backgrounds that will benefit from this law. But I want to take a moment just to thank my colleagues in the Latino Legislative Caucus who made this a priority bill this year, to push this and come together to make sure that we make this a reality for our communities. I want to take a moment just to especially thank our Latino caucus senators who were determined to make sure that this bill was going to move forward, including Senators Lara and De Leon. But I also want to thank our Speaker and our President Pro Tem, who have always been strongly supportive of this important measure. But members, this is the best shape that this bill has ever been. It's been argued in Sacramento, in these chambers for almost 2 decades. But for the first time in the history of this bill, we have Republican co-authors. I want to commend Senator Anthony Cannella for joining with us and co-authoring this for the very first time. We've had Republican Assembly members who have voted for this bill this year. I want to thank them as well. But for the first time ever, last Friday, we got the first endorsement ever by the California Police Chiefs Association. Law enforcement is on board with this bill, with these amendments that we've taken to make sure we put it in the best shape. But also, we have a governor who has engaged in serious negotiations because he understands how important this bill is for California. And lastly, I just want to thank my staff, the workers in my office who knew how important this bill and the previous bill were for hardworking Californians, and they worked diligently for many months to make sure we put this bill in the best shape. But lastly, members, I want to commend and thank somebody who's not here with us today, but who's watching us from Los Angeles, from home, and that is our good friend and former colleague here, Senator Gil Cedillo, who at the end of his term last year asked me to carry the torch, to keep fighting for this bill, to keep making it a reality, so we have to get it done in 2013. And so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge him, but also, as you may not know, when I was an Assembly fellow back in 2001 and 2002, the first person that I met to explain what it was like to be a legislator here in Sacramento was Gil Cedillo. And he was fighting for this bill then, and here we are 11 years later, and I'm able to carry on his work and make it a reality. But I remember a story when his late wife passed away, Ruby Cedillo, and when she was almost facing death, she took a moment and she urged Gil to say, don't give up until you make this law a reality in the state of California. I read that story, and I want to dedicate this night, this special moment, in honor of Ruby Cedillo and also his parents, whose mom was just here on the floor last year as his Woman of the Year. She passed away. She didn't get to see this moment either. His father just passed away last weekend, Gilbert and Mary Cedillo, his parents, who didn't get to see this moment. They knew how important this was for him, but they're up in a better place, but they could look down on us tonight and see that California is making history, and California is making this a reality for the thousands, if not millions, of hardworking immigrants who only want a lawful way to drive their cars to work, to church, to take their kids to school, to buy groceries, to take them to the doctor.
1 second, Mr. Alejo. There's no use of photography on the floor by members, by staff, by anybody other than the photographers who have their credentials with us. I would remind everybody on the floor, in the back of the chambers, in the gallery, and I would ask that you observe all the other rules of the House. Mr. Alejo, please proceed. You have 30 seconds.
Members, next year is the 20th anniversary of Prop 187. When that took place, many of us, including Ricardo Lara and I, Manuel Press, we were just kids, 19-year-olds, young activists who fought to stand up for our communities during one of the most draconian measures in the history of California. And here we are 20 years later as members of this legislature, able to author historic legislation like this that integrates the immigrant community, that makes their life better. And I want to thank everyone. But this is a moment, members, that years from now you'll reflect back on this historic night and you're going to ask yourself, were you on the right side of history? Did you do the right thing for working families?
Thank you, Mr. Alejo. Please
I just
finish.
want to close, Mr. Speaker, I just want to dedicate this to the thousands of farm workers, hotel workers, restaurant workers who work so hard and ask for us to enact this legislation. It just shows que sí se puede. We did get it done. Muchas gracias, and I urge an aye vote.
The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 55, noes 19. Senate amendments are concurred in.